Thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction. You can see from my waistline that it's far too much Cashel blue cheese and not enough porridge that I take. Can I thank you, first of all, Michael, and all of you involved with the Kilmainham and Inchicore Heritage Group for the invitation to take part in this opening of this wonderful exhibition here this afternoon. We're really in an area that, as those of you who are local to this area know, is full of sites of enormous historic importance in relation to 1916. Just behind us here, the site of the former Richmond Barracks, a little bit up the road, Kilmainham Jail. Beyond that, the Royal Hospital, at the time headquarters of the British Army in Ireland. Across from that, the South Dublin Union, now James's Hospital, and the outlying posts that were established by the garrison there on Easter Monday in Rose Distillery and in Maribon Lane and around the area. So I think, looking at a map as I did before I came out this afternoon, aside perhaps from the area of the GPO, this part of the city really has the most significant concentration of historic sites of importance in relation to understanding 1916. And I think that's very important to acknowledge and understand as we assemble here at this very important historic site as well. And what does that mean for all of us who live in the Dublin 8 area, and perhaps for those who are beyond its boundaries, those who aren't as fortunate to live in this part of the city as we are? Well, I think it means that we have, if you like, a point of access, a portal to enter a deeper and more profound understanding of the events of Easter week 100 years ago. Something really quite remarkable, certainly in my lifetime, has happened in the last number of months in the way that people have engaged with these events. There's a kind of hunger, isn't there, to understand what happened, what motivated these men and women to do what they did, what were the consequences of what they did for Ireland as a whole and for them individually and for their families. I think for me I began to appreciate that about this time last year, when RTE organised a series of seminars and events in the centre of Dublin to mark the 99th anniversary of the Rising, and people queued down the street outside hotels and other venues in the city to listen to historians talking about the events of Easter week 1916. And it dawned on me then that, for perhaps fairly understandable reasons, people had a hunger to understand. I think in part because for a long period of time we just didn't remember or talk about the events of Easter week 100 years ago. And there are perhaps good reasons for that, because of the troubles in Northern Ireland. Perhaps people were uncomfortable with the morality of political violence. Certainly with the settlement in Northern Ireland, it seems to me that the broad Irish public has opened up now to try and have an understanding of these events and appreciate something of the individuals that were involved. As Michael said, I was involved in a documentary programme made by RTE, broadcast earlier this year, about the life and the death of Michael Mallin. And that seemed to elicit, at least in terms of the reaction I got, a quite extraordinary response from people. People seemed incredibly interested in this man's life. I think that was partly because of the way the programme was assembled and the tremendous assistance and support and encouragement we got from the Mallin family, some of whom are here today. They couldn't have been more helpful in terms of sharing with us their own recollections of their grandfather and giving us access to documents and letters that really allowed us to open up the story of his life. And we also had the opportunity to travel to Hong Kong and to interview Father Joseph Mallin, who was just a small child at the time of his father's execution, but spoke to us and was very, very helpful in allowing us to record an interview with him, which was used in the programme. So I think the Michael Mallin that we tried to present was a real human being. When I grew up in my school days, the 1916 leaders were obscure people. They were very one-dimensional. There was certainly a limited number of people who were put before us, Pearse and Connolly and perhaps a couple of others. Michael Mallin and others who also paid with their lives after the Rising were very largely forgotten and ignored, for whatever reason that may have been. But even those who were acknowledged and remembered were remembered, it seems to me, in a very one-dimensional way. They were almost like plaster saints, weren't they? They were put up there on a pedestal, and they weren't real human beings at all. Because of course real human beings are full of conflicts and full of flaws, as well as being noble and courageous and willing to sacrifice themselves. And I think that's what we've begun to understand now, and perhaps the Michael Mallin programme was an example of that, where we've begun to understand that those who took part in the events of Easter week 1916 did so for many different motives. They were certainly showing a willingness to sacrifice for their country and for their community, but very many of them, perhaps most of them, didn't want to die. Michael Mallin certainly didn't want to die. Michael Mallin, I think all the evidence suggests, would have fought on if he could, but the order came from Pearse, from his commander, to lay down arms, to surrender unconditionally, and he obeyed that order, and at that moment probably knew that he would pay with his life. But he was a human being, as well as being a revolutionary and someone who was committed to social justice. He was also clearly somebody who was a father and a husband, and he wanted the best for his family. And as we know from the accounts of his final days and the letters he wrote, was desperately distressed to be facing his death and leaving his family quite possibly to poverty and destitution. And indeed the years that followed on were very difficult years for Agnes and for her children. She passed away relatively young, still a woman in her 50s, and perhaps an illness that was worsened by her experience of losing her husband in the circumstances in which he did. So I think our understanding now of the individuals who were involved in the Rising is a much more complex and much more interesting, much more nuanced and much deeper understanding of all of those individuals, Michael Mallin included. And of course what that means as well is that our understanding of the event itself is something that we appreciate now to be much more complex perhaps than was presented to us maybe when people like me were growing up around the time of the 50th anniversary. We argue now about the rights and wrongs of the Rising. We have vigorous, I think, and healthy debates. People I know over the years have complained about revisionist historians, but I think actually in a way they did a favour by encouraging and promoting and provoking debate and discussion about this aspect of our history. And I think it's a very healthy thing for us as a people. I think it's as somebody who's involved in journalism and reporting the truth, I hope. I think it brings us closer to the truth and closer to understanding. And I think if we're looking for some encouragement for the future, it will perhaps help us with our own reconciliation here on the island of Ireland. And I suppose ultimately, perhaps someday to see a unionist leader standing on the platform outside the GPO as Nationalist Ireland remembers 1916 will be the ultimate evidence, if you like, that we have completed this process of this journey of reconciliation and bringing together the traditions on this island. I want to once again congratulate to Michael and the team involved in putting this exhibition together. I'm going to come back at my leisure and have a little look around in the quiet of some morning if I can, and I encourage you also to do the same. And I particularly encourage you, if you have children or grandchildren, to bring them along here, to introduce them to the people who are here on the walls. Tell them the story of Michael Mallin, tell them the story of Emmet Hall, tell them the story of the involvement of this area and people from this area, and maybe look up neighbours and look up relations perhaps who took part in the Rising. One of the other aspects, if you like, that's deepened our understanding of this whole period is the wealth of new information that's now available if you want to go and look for it. The public records, the Office of Public Records has placed online the pension records of many of those who took part in the period 1916 through to 22, and you also have the testimonies from the Bureau of Military History, which has also given us a wonderful insight into the motivation of many of those who took part in what happened that week and in the subsequent period. So there's a rich vein of human stories to help us to understand and to have a deeper appreciation of a sacrifice that a previous generation made. So today we can stand here as citizens of the Irish Republic wondering, when will we have a government? Thank you very much indeed.